Oh, my dog is under my foot. Rose, are you there? Can you hear me? Oh, there's Az. I want to ask her about what sounds better. Hey, Az, can you hear me? Azriel! Nobody hears me. Kenzie, can you hear me? Doing a sound check.
Okay. I just was able to unmute. I've been muted this whole time. I've been trying to unmute and say, yes, I hear you fine. It's great. It's wonderful.
Okay, well, I was going to ask because I could put in my headphones. I didn't know if that would improve the sound quality or not.
I don't know. It's pretty good right now. Anybody else?
Rose said she walked away. That's why she wasn't responding. How'd the classes go yesterday, Az?
They went pretty well. This morning was a disaster. We had Gage Greenwood for the keynote speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I hit record, he bounced. I mean, it was gone, just gone. And we waited and we waited and we waited until, about 6 minutes ago. And he still was not able to get back on. So he finally contacted me and said that he just couldn't get back on. And so
Weird.
we had a keynote with no keynote speaker.
So we're 2 for 3 with keynotes. We all have to like cross everything we have for tests tomorrow, right?
I know it. And she informed me that I didn't have a link up for her either. So I just put that up this morning. I looked down and I said, okay, there's 20 of them now. Surely that's it.
Oh, it happens, especially when we got live stuff going on as well.
Yes. And Mercury in retrograde never helps anything.
No, it doesn't. That's why I had such weird dreams these last 2 nights. Oh my goodness.
Never helps anything. No.
Hey, one of them was really fun. I was actually living my story dark, and I love dreams that a lot of people would consider nightmares. So like we're driving around in the dark trying to stay in the light, and we had to stop and use the bathroom. And if you read my latest episode of Dark, you'll have a reason to be afraid of porta potties now. And so we're like trying to find a porta potty in the middle of the night, but not get eaten during it. And I just wake up in the morning. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to live my story. It was so cool. And
That's
other
awesome.
people were like, you just spent the night terrified. Yeah, it was so
awesome. Well, it's almost time for you to start. Let me introduce you though. This is Tirza M.M. Hawkins, who we call our scream queen at Vella. And she has a tendency to write things that bring you chills. She has written many frightening Vellas. Let's see, we've got Templetown, we've got Dark, we've got my favorite, Spider Sight, and many more that I can't even name. You've got so many. You've got The Monarch's Daughter, which is an ongoing Vella of how many episodes do you have now, Tirza?
That one, I was just writing episode 217 for that one. So it's over 240,000 words. I'm on season 4 at the moment, actually getting ready to wrap up season 4. And I have readers that have told me, because they know that I end each season on a huge cliffhanger and something awful happens. And so they're trying to forbid me from having any more season finales so they don't have to go through the pain. They're like,
I
you
don't think they're
torture
going
us.
to be able to stop you. But anyway, this is who is speaking to you today about writing the scares. I'm thrilled that she has agreed to do a session for the conference, and I am going to mute my mic now and turn it over to Tirza M.M. Hawkins.
Yeah, Rose put up in the chat his game. That's another one. I'm having so much fun with season 2 of his game. All right, we're going to talk about how do we scare our readers. And it really is, there are a few things that come down to just a formula that is helpful for you to follow and to be aware of while you're doing this. So as I go along, I'll try to pause in between topics briefly. So if you have questions, put them up in the chat, and then I'll try to catch them at that point. So I wanted to talk about pacing first, and there's only about 2 or 3 topics in here that we're going to cover that will also be talked about in the next session with self-editing for fiction authors, because there are a few things that you need to think about as to how you structure your story that is going to make it more scary. So the first thing I want to talk about is pacing. And this is really important. If you've ever opened, when we think about pacing in this digital age, we need to think about the way that the text appears on the screen as well as in our book. And so it used to be you could get away with these really long paragraphs. In book form, it was easier for your eye to follow. But having something that breaks up that text, that monotony on the screen as you're reading, either on an e-reader that you might have purchased or on an app on your phone, it's really important. It says it's recording us. I see the record. It's really important to have something that breaks up the eye. And what happens when you have a big long paragraph, and I'm going to point out one of the worst books for long paragraphs I've ever read, and is American Psycho. It had a really long sentence that was probably like a third of the page, and I had to reread that sentence 4 or 5 times in order to understand first that it was all the same sentence, and then to get the understanding of what the sentence was saying. So when we're writing to scare people, we definitely don't want them to have to reread anything. We need them to keep going. We need to set this pace for them that they can read at comfortably. And then with paragraph length, again, American Psycho, I think the paragraph touched on 6 pages. It began, and then you turn the page, and it was on both of those. You turn the page, and it was on both of those, and then it was on a 6th page as well. And what happens when your reader sees a long paragraph is they settle in. It's more of a relaxing, I'm gonna like lean back and just read, and it's a settling in. And that's not what we're looking to do when we're trying to scare people. Is we want them on the edge of the seat. We want them leaning forward. So again, breaking that up is important, but not taking it to the extreme with the pacing. You want to purposefully use really short paragraphs and really short sentences when there's something that you want to highlight, when you want it to stand out, or when you want to get your reader's heart rate up. You might use a couple of them in a row. And one of the best examples of pacing that I have seen in a novel I read was, and I didn't write it, Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King. If you've read that, that's one of his early fantasy novels. At the end of that novel, he has chapters even. I think there's one chapter that's only 1 sentence long. And what it is it's just enough where it gives you insight about this character. It goes to the character and it tells you just enough about them to be like, oh shoot, I need to be worried. Something's happening here. And then he switches to the next. And then you have something else that happens from the other point of view, and then he goes back to that character, and it's just this really short chapter, and it's just enough to like take your breath away. So that's something that happens when we work with our pacing. So long paragraphs, long sentences give the reader breath. It slows them down. short sentences and short paragraphs and short chapters take their breath away. So that's something that we as the author can control. Is this a moment where I want my reader to almost like gasp and like, so if you think about that right now of what happens in your body when something's exciting is happening, this is just going to lead fluidly into our next topic, is that bodily sensation. Think of what happens when you get excited, something's speeding up, you have that gas, you're out of breath. So now take a moment to think about what's happening in your body. Do you think about things tightening, leaning forward, your heart rate speeding up? Where do you feel your heart? Is it in your chest? Is it in your head? Do you have a throbbing in your throat or a tightening in your throat? That is, we want to think about all of these fear synonyms and how do we get the reader to experience that in their body. So as the author, it is our job to know what fear, panic, dread, all of that feels like in our body. So hopefully on a not too traumatic scale, you've experienced those emotions at some point in your life. And doing this exercise is not meant as therapy, so please don't delve into your deepest traumas if those are something that you need to talk to a psychologist about. But pick like a safe trauma, that thing that happened where everybody was okay in the end, but you still experienced in that moment like really extreme dread. I remember one night walking with my best friend. My parents owned 14 acres and there was a house on either end. And so we're walking up the hill in the middle of the night in the dark in the country by ourselves, and we had just watched a scary movie and we're imagining all of the awful things that could be out there. Like we knew that there were coyotes nearby. And so it just created this super heavy atmosphere that like tightened us down. We're walking huddled close together. So, and of course we made it to the other house just safe and fine. So that's a good memory for me to step back into and be like, okay, I had that moment of extreme fear. What did it feel like in my body? And so if you can sit down and capture some of that, or even if you're watching a scary movie and you're at a part that really scares you, take some notes. What is that feeling like in your body? What's happening? And write those down. Because one of the worst things that we can do is to get super vague at this point and to tell our reader he was scared. Our main character, John, he was scared. That we can't empathize with him on a deep level if we're just so, oh, that person's scared. But if we're like, his heart's racing, his chest is tightening, it's difficult to breathe, he's gasping for air, those are the sensations that we need to write into our story. Because if we've written a character that our reader can identify with, they're going to feel that as well. So I'm going to pause for air now that I've made myself all breathless. So that's a good homework assignment for you right there, is to think about a time when you were truly scared, apprehensive about something, even, people that really don't like taking tests. Imagining you have to take like that big, huge exam, a bar exam, and if you fail it, you can't take it for a year, and you hate taking tests, and it's like $5,000 to take it again. Like, think of like the worst scenario. Or if you hate public speaking, like put yourself in that situation. What would it feel like if you had to get up in front of 1 million people unprepared and talk for an hour and nobody's going to interrupt you? All eyes are on you. So find like 3 or 4 situations. Dakota's nightmares, remembering stupid exams. Oh my gosh, when I had to take placement tests in college, I had never been to public school before. I had been homeschooled my entire life. So going and taking these placement tests was the absolute worst thing. And I begged my mom to come with me. So she brought along a book and sat out there for like 2 or 3 hours while I took my placement test. Do you have any advice for coming up with new sorts of visceral reaction descriptions for fears so you don't overuse tightened chest, stuttering heart? So that's a great question. That's going to lead into, we do call that like fresh writing. Now, we don't want to get too fresh on our writing that is just over the top out there and nobody can relate to it. So always make it relatable. I saw on Facebook the other day, somebody's like, oh, you know, it's a really tough writing day when you have to pull out this book. This is the Emotion Thesaurus. And I was like, no, I use this, like if you use this book daily in your writing for an entire year, you're going to have it memorized. So I encourage you to get a copy and use it until it falls apart. This sits on my desk. I did not have to go looking for this book. This book sits on my desk within arm's length whenever I am writing. So it's got really great descriptions in here. And thinking of those new visceral reactions, you can take whatever it says in here, the tightening of the chest, and go to a thesaurus. So take those specific words that it might use and go to a thesaurus and look about a different way to say it. Because when it comes down to it, you know, there is a limited number of bodily reaction sensations that we feel when we're afraid. So just finding a way to write it fresh for you in a way that's true to your style. And I am always using a thesaurus. So I have my tabs open on my browser. One of them is always, I'm always typing in synonyms for this word. And then I'll look at it and I'll even dive into those synonyms that I'm finding there. Another website that's really good, I'm going to copy and paste this into our chat. It's called relatedwords.io. And that is one, I believe it was Chad Hensley who introduced me to that website. So if you're like, I'm tired of using the word tightened, his chest was tight with fear, like go and do a thesaurus hunt, go down a rabbit hole, just spend that time finding those phrases that speak to you, that help you make your writing fresh. Good, Coda. Get the damn book. The book is amazing. I actually, this isn't the first time Coda's heard me recommend it to her. If I have done any editing for you ever, I will tell you to get that book. That's one of the first things I do. All right, where do we find inspiration for bringing these scares? One of the scariest things that you can use as inspiration is real life events. If you've ever read The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum, that is, and there's a movie based on it as well, that is based on a really horrific true crime of extreme child abuse of these two sisters, and how this lady used, the younger sister was disabled, so she wasn't even a stepmom, like she was just being paid by the parents to take care of these kids or something. And so she used the younger sister's disabilities to control the older sister. And then the older sister was the one that was horrifically abused. It's a true story. And then Jack Ketchum wrote this novel based off of it. Yeah, it was a movie. It's awful. It will make you horrified, shocked, cry. And I first read it as novel and then later found out it was true crime. And so really, humans are the worst monsters out there. So if you want to find some truly horrific things, first go digging into true crime stories for inspiration. I know, makes your skin crawl. You're like, these people. The next one is look into folklore of countries that are like just remote. Those are going to have there's some really crazy folklore out there. There's some really crazy monster stories out there. I used that in my story, Hide from the Light. I think it was supposed to be set in Bulgaria. I don't remember. I'm bad with names, so I don't even know the location for my short story. But I looked up folklore of that area to find who are their monsters. Like, what are these people? Who are their boogeymans, essentially, is what you're doing. So, yeah, Native American. So, looking outside your culture, your nationality, look outside your country, like find those remote places, and find the creepiest stories that are out there if you need some fuel for your writing. One of my favorite pieces of advice, I'm going to attribute it to Stephen King because he's my favorite author, and I'm 95% sure he's the one that said, write what you're afraid about. And that is what I do. I have I've been arachnophobic my whole life, and for really no reason, but everyone knows if you want to make me scream, just put a spider in my face. My little brother did that to me in church one time. I'm standing around my friends. I'm like 12 years old, and he's 7-year-old little brat, and he comes running up. He's like, Tirza, look at Daddy Longlegs, and he puts it in my face. I screamed. I was out of there. I embarrassed myself in front of my friends. But what I did do is I started writing about spiders. So the novel Spider Site is all about spiders. And what I love is that I put my fear of spiders into that book. And when people read it, they tell me they're more arachnophobic after they're done reading it than they were beforehand. I feel like with every reader I get, I'm a little less arachnophobic and they're a little more. Like I can now, depending on the size of the spider, tolerate being in the same room with it. Like I don't immediately kill spiders anymore. I signed all my Spider Site books, kill spiders. So I think I have people, I'm creating my army of spider killers out there. So if you can find what you're afraid of, and then I have 2 other spider short stories. And so it's like my goal is to make other people afraid of spiders. So then thinking about what you're afraid of, what other people are afraid of, and then always like, how can I make this worse? Asking those questions. Well, what if this? How can I make it worse? What can I do to make this a new concept? And so combining phobias. So for me, I'm not only arachnophobic, I'm claustrophobic. So if I was sitting here in this room and there's a spider up in the corner and I'm like, okay, I've got to keep teaching now for another 40 minutes. Depending on the size of the spider, I might be okay. But you shrink this down. Now, one of the worst scenarios is when I go into the bathroom, I'm on the toilet, I can't move, and then I see the spider over the door that I need to escape through. Then I'm trapped. Then the claustrophobia sets in. It's a tighter space. So you could take that even smaller. What if you put me in a coffin with spiders? So, like, how can you keep making those fears worse? How can you keep building upon them? You know, what are other things? What if I'm in a coffin with spiders and it's slowly filling with water? I've almost drowned twice in my life, so I've got a fear of water. So, like, keep adding on to that. And then if you can put yourself safely in that situation, don't traumatize yourself, but imagining yourself there, again, going into those body sensations. What is happening in your body to see a coffin? So we have to find Azriel's other phobia and combine it with coffin for her, and then just keep making it worse. For Coda, it sounds like because of the little holes, we're gonna put her in a coffin. We're gonna drill little tiny holes in it, and we're gonna start shoving whatever insects she doesn't like through it until you stroke out of your chair. Yes, don't push yourself so hard that you give you a heart attack. All right. So asking those questions, that's one of my favorite things to do as an author. Is I've got several questions that I'll ask. Well, what if this happens? And then you sit and you think on it. Well, what if, okay, so if that happened, then what if this happens? Questions are your friend. If you ask your brain a question and let it do some work, it will answer you. And you might, as a horror author, you might be terrified by what it comes up with. I also like to ask, what is the worst that could happen? That one's really scary for your brain to do for you. Thanksgiving Day, I was loading the fireplace. We have a wood stove before I was heading out to have family dinner. A few sparks fell out. I was trying to make sure that I cleaned them up well enough. And then all of a sudden I was afraid to leave the house because I was convinced it was going to burn down while I was driving to my family's, and my pets inside were going to be killed. So that's what happens when you ask your brain what's the worst thing that could happen. Or how could this be scarier? That's another thing, is how can I make that even scarier? All right, so with Coda, we're going to have super mosquitoes that eat all of these holes into her, and then there's going to be all of these little spawn that hatch out of that hole. So combining her fear of parasites, hole, and hatred of mosquitoes. See, build on your phobias, because I mean, isn't that truly gross to think about? Like, what if all of these insects like laid all of their larvae in your skin, and all of a sudden one day, like, they just started popping out? Like, all right, moving on to Callie said there's a way to think that doesn't involve always jumping to the worst case scenario. Not for us, not if we want to be really good at this. We always got to be thinking about that worst case. So foreshadowing, dropping breadcrumbs to the main event. When it's so disappointing to read a book and then at the end, there was one I recently read. I guess I won't mention names, that way they can't ever be mad at me, but it's a well-known author, and I was reading one of his kind of horror thriller mystery books, and it was going along great. He really did the red herring. I was looking at somebody else as being the perpetrator, and when it was really someone else. And so I was thrown off the trail, but then the way that he wrapped it all up in the last 20 pages was he explained why this person was doing the horrible things he did because of all of this horrible stuff that had happened in his background. And there was absolutely nothing. I was like, oh, well, this is really convenient. I was like, you just gave me all of this info dump of this awful trauma that happened to him when he was 6 years old, but this wasn't reflected in his personality leading up to it in the entire rest of the book. And I was super disappointed. I was like, this is really convenient for you as an author, because you did not foreshadow this at all. And now I really don't even know if I want to read your other books. This is what you're going to do to me. Your readers want breadcrumbs. They want a trail to follow. Even if you're sending them on the wrong trail, give them a little bit of breadcrumbs along both if you want to read them down a misdirection. But just always have those breadcrumbs along there. They're going to respect you more for having a well thought out story. If you read Spider Sight, that I set that up at the beginning with Fred asking for food. The spider's asking for food. He's hungry. The little girl's trying to feed him. And so, you know, it just starts out as this innocent little mystery of trying to feed her invisible spider friend some food. Leave enough to the imagination. Don't feel like you have to describe everything. One of the movies that scared me as a teenager when it came out was Jeepers Creepers, but I was only scared for the first half because they didn't actually show you what the creature looked like. And so it was a mystery. Your mind will always imagine more horrible things than you can create in a visual. So don't feel like you have to over explain. You can keep some mystery there. Another disappointing movie was The Boogeyman, that came out in the early 2000s. And the first half, again, scary until they showed the boogeyman. I think he was like this swirling dust dude, and it was like, oh, well, I can't be afraid of him anymore. I mean, he really just, I remember looking like a dust devil man, and it's like, I see dust devils every day driving through the country. So keeping enough to the imagination. Don't feel like you have to over describe your creatures, because what the person can imagine in their head, and then that fear of the unknown is going to be worse. Coda says, darkness falls. The tooth fairy was so scary until the climax. Yeah, don't ruin the ending. just if you can't make it as great as you've built it up to, like figure out a way to rewrite that. That might be a time for problem solving with some beta readers and asking them how your ending went, because the worst thing you can do when you've created this amazing build up is just to go and leave people on a like, oh well, that was disappointing. So let's talk about characters for a moment. We need to, in a horror, we need to write characters that the readers can identify with. If your main character is a jerk that nobody likes, your reader's gonna be hoping, they're gonna be like, any day now you can get rid of this one. Like, this one's free to go. So if you really want to make your reader nervous, you've got to write somebody that they can either care about or identify with. They need to see themselves in that position, or they need to deeply care about that person and not want anything bad to happen to them. And the same goes with your villain. One of the big things, I was just talking to an editing client about this, and she had a villain that was a child molester. And so he's being written as this really cold, unfeeling. I mean, we can all imagine the personality that we associate with somebody that's willing to hurt kids, especially in sexual ways. And I told her, you need to know their backstory. A villain is, they're not born, they're made, and they have motivations, they have goals, they have reasons for thinking they're justified in what they're doing. So you do need to create some of that realistic nature to your villain. I know we do have a few real life examples of people that we think are just inherently evil and have been born that way. But you know, digging into that psychology and the background, you want to still make your villain, in the end, if they can be slightly relatable to, that way that your reader can care a little bit about them, it's going to make what they do much more impactful. Because we're always, if we can care about the villain, we're always hoping for that turnaround. You know, Darth Vader in Star Wars, you know, you're kind of glad that in the end Darth Vader, you know, recognized his son and they had that little sweet father-son moment. Not that that's horror, but it was still impactful and it left people with a strong emotion. And that's another thing I'm an advocate for. If you're writing to scare, disturb, horrify, we want those strong emotions so we can build in other ones to our story as well. Should talk about this with foreshadowing, but gradually upping the stakes. You can start out with something small and unimportant. In the example of Spider Sight, we're just going with something like really innocent. She's trying to feed her spider friends, and then it goes from, you know, trying to feed him a fly to then we're feeding him only bad people. And so it's something that we can justify, but then the stakes are up because now he's demanding good people and now he's demanding more and more. And so it just keeps building. So you can't have the most horrific thing that happens to your character be a car accident. It's what happens after that. Because a lot of people are in car accidents. A lot of them are really bad car accidents, but it's building upon that. What if that car accident starts to impact the rest of their life? And then they can't leave their house, and then they develop that agoraphobia and can't leave their house for other reasons. And like, just keep building upon it. You can't, you kind of want to think even like global. Not everything is global in our horror books, but the bigger you can make those stakes, the more impact that's going to have on your story. Taking something innocent and sweet and turning it evil. This is why people hate dolls, clowns, creepy children. So, if you can take puppies and kittens and all of a sudden make it the most horrific thing, scariest thing anyone's ever read, that is going to be impactful. Cujo, he was a family pet. You feel sorry for that poor dog. Yeah, it was the clown. Pet Cemetery, again, family pet. These are these kids buried these pets there in a cemetery. Like, there was an established cemetery for pets. If I lived nearby and my pet died, my goldfish, Return of the Killer Goldfish. There we go. Anyone that wants it can have that one. I'm not writing that. The goldfish would have to,
Hateful hamster.
Hamster. There we go. Yes. So just taking anything cute, sweet, and innocent, a fluffy stuffed animal. Because that hamsters are already big. But it is when you take something that we inherently just think of. When you think of a kitten, most people are like, oh. So when you can take something that is so sweet like that and turn, like, that's the reaction that we want. Rabbits. Anyone see that old movie Night of the Lepus, where the rabbits run over the electricity and they turn into like huge human eating? Really cheesy old movie for you. Using sensory and atmosphere. So thinking about the setting for your story, it can be a lot harder, and this isn't saying it can't be done, because if you can, so like the difference between a sunny day and then the middle of the night, like just inherently a sunny day, we think everything's good, calm, we're relaxed. Middle of the night, people are usually more scared, tense, and nervous. So if you can take a sunny day and something horrific happen into it, so that when people walk outside in the middle of summer and they're like, oh shoot, remember that story where this happened in the middle of a sunny day? Like, that is going to be much more difficult than middle of the night. People walk outside and they're like, oh, like there's so many, like, I watched that movie last night. Now I want to sleep with my light on, or I need somebody to come out and take the garbage can to the end of the road with me because it's dark and those werewolves might be out tonight. So thinking of that setting, and then sensory detail. So I just finished this book. I don't remember the author's name, but the book was called The Keeper, and it was her debut author. I think her first name's Sarah like Latham or something like that. It rained nonstop in this book, and she did not quit talking about it. And when I read that book, my feet were physically dry in socks, but I felt like my feet were pruned every time I read that book from like sitting in water for so long. Like, I seriously just felt like my body pruned, because she talked about this water. She talked about the flooding on the street, the people, somebody had to like walk in the rain to their friend's house because their car was broken down. She talked about it seeping into the basement and the smells that were happening. This book was wet from all of this rain that was happening nonstop, and it just created this really heavy, damp atmosphere. And she just wove it in, and it wasn't ever the same. It was always talking about a different aspect of it. Then the river was flooding, and so they're worried about the bridge going out because the water level's rising. And so just thinking about what are those sensory details that you can add in to create a certain mood or a certain atmosphere for your story. It does sound like England. England's only dry like a month out of the year. Something that we'll get into a little bit in the self-editing, we'll get into that more in the self-editing, is the showing. We don't want to tell people, and we did talk about this a tiny bit with the sensations, is don't say that somebody was terrified. Don't say the house was old. They walked up on an old scary mansion. No, please don't do that. You can say that if that's leading into a description. It's okay to have like that first, like, oh whoa, that place is really old. even as a thought of a character as they walk up, and like, that's a see, a lot of these rules that I'll use for I don't always apply them to dialogue. I'll let my characters think naturally the way that humans would think. I'll let them use adverbs a little bit more than I would in the rest of the writing, just because that's the way that people talk. So if you have that being a thought or something they say to a friend, they walk up, whoa, that house is really old. But then describing that, like talking about the shutters falling off, the paint peeling, it looked like nobody had set foot on the property in years, about the plants growing up through the sidewalk or through the driveway, about the bird's nest in the gutter on the roof, you know, the broken cracked windows, the cobwebs, how it looked like the spiders and the blackberry bushes had taken over the front porch. Like, you need to paint that picture to give it the creepy atmosphere of like, this is not a place that I want to go into. Talk about the wind whistling through, the pipe on the roof. Whatever you can do to bring in all of those senses, even the air around it tasted thick and moldy and sat on your tongue like wet dog that you can't get off, So just bringing in, like, what are all of the sensory details beyond just the scene of it, but what feeling does it give them? As they walk closer, a heavy dread settled over them. Their feet got heavier and didn't, want to keep taking steps. So thinking about all of those sensory details that you can bring into there, and using all of the senses, taste, touch, smell, sight. Spreading out the gore. This is kind of something with talking about the pacing as well. When you do something for too long, you're desensitizing your reader. If you think about, I probably shouldn't use this as an example because I really haven't seen these movies, but the Need for Speed movies, I think they're about a car race. And so like, that's the whole point of the movie, is this car race, but they break up the action with other things. There's character development moments, there's sex, there's, relationship times, there's flashbacks, there could be flash forwards. Like, there's things that break up that action, because if you have everything full speed or full horror in your book the whole time, your reader's going to become numb to that. So you've got to build that pacing. You won't be able to bring that horror back up as much if you haven't like let it drop and then build and drop. Now, granted, this example is from a more splatterpunk novel, but The Groomer is a novel about it's really a group of people, but there was one or two of them that were the ones that went onto social media. They went onto Instagram. They hunted out the depressed teenagers and made friends with them and lured them away for these other people to do awful things to them. The guy was in the park, like, making friends with the 5-year-old. And so the story centers around this family where their young daughter gets kidnapped, and then since the police aren't doing enough, the father goes out looking for the guy that groomed and kidnapped his child. And so when he catches him, he does all of this torture to him. And so the second half of the book is really this one long torture scene. And at the beginning, it's gruesome. You're like, oh my gosh, the awful things that he's doing. Like, he's talking about how the groomer, he's tied to a chair, he peed his pants, talking about the pee on the floor, and then the guy cuts him, so now there's blood and urine on the floor. And then he talks about pouring alcohol on the wound, so now there's alcohol, blood, and urine on the floor, and you're like, oh wow, now we're starting to get bogged down. But it's okay if you want to have a super long torture scene, but break that up, because they'll be more gruesome when you come back to it. If you have like oh my gosh, this is the beginning of it, and leave it at a suspenseful cliffhanger, and then go and show something normal, something, family, the other parts of the family, because the wife was out there looking for the dad, wondering where the dad was while he's out there torturing the killer. So if you can have that back and forth, because then each time you throw the person back into that torture or that horror, whatever you've got going on, it's going to be more impactful. If so, it's kind of, you want to relax, tighten it up, horrify them, whatever, scare them, and then relax them down again. So creating that false sense of security, those lulls in between, will help you to not desensitize your readers. Active versus passive. We'll get into this in the editing a little bit more, but just talking about it, whenever your sentences are active, that means that the subject of the sentence, the main thing that you're focusing on, is the thing that's doing the action. So for example, like his hand was crushed by the wheel. In this case, that is a passive sentence, because we are, in that case, we're wondering if the author is trying to focus on the hand more than the action that was happening, because the hand was the subject. Now, however, when we have the active writing, it's a lot easier to bring in more details, whereas the wheel crushed his hand, splintering bone, flattening flesh, like it just helps us get into a better flow of describing it more. The one case in which passive is helpful is when maybe you don't know what did it. So if you come along your cat is, injured out in the middle of nowhere, and you say the cat was attacked. And so like, it has like scratches on it and stuff, but we don't know what did it. The cat was attacked. And so the focus there is on the cat, because we don't know what happened to it. However, if you find your cat like dead by the side of the road, you could assume it's hit by a car. So we could say the cat was hit by a car. But if the person is standing there and they're watching their cat crossing the road, and the car is coming and they're seeing what's happening, you need to make sure that you're writing that in the active. The car is screaming towards this cat. Obviously, the driver doesn't see, they're not slowing down. And then all of a sudden, there's this horrible squeal and screeching of tires. And so we want to make sure that whenever we can, whatever is doing the thing is the subject of the sentence, and using that to keep it active. And that's going to keep it more punchy rather than passive. One of the big ways you can tell if you're being passive is if you're using the word was, W-A-S. He was stunned. No, he wasn't stunned. Something stunned him. So start with whatever it was that stunned him and go from there. He was bored. No, the class bored him to tears. So whenever you have a was with a verb, something else is doing the thing. The subject of the sentence that you wrote isn't, so that's a passive sentence. So that's where you use your Control F on your document and search for all of those was, and then see, are we connected to a verb? Because they also, just look for those was's and get rid of them. Because even if you say he was bored, again, like something is boring him, or that's a sign that you're showing, not telling. Like instead of he was bored, that again would lead you to be telling the reader, oh, he's bored, rather than John sat and stared at the clock as the hand seemed to not move hour by hour. He's trying to get through a day or something. So it's typically you're either telling rather than showing, or you're being passive and not active. As we're closing up, let's talk about a couple other quick things. One, start it off strong. Get that setup going immediately. Give the reader something to suck them in. When I pick up a horror book, I want to be engaged from the very first page. And if it takes more than a chapter or two, I'm going to start questioning the ability of the author to engage me in the story at all. One of the best setups that I ever saw was in a Dean Koontz book. Don't ask me which one. I probably couldn't pick it out of a list of names because I'm horrible at names like that. I think it was The Happening, but I'm not 100% sure. But in the very beginning of the story, the lady's in her house and her dogs start going crazy and they're barking, and she goes and she looks, and there's a pack of coyotes on her porch. And if you have ever been around coyotes, number one, that is the most horrible sound an animal can make is coyotes. Like, go listen to their howl. It is creepy. And I grew up in the country, and our neighbors had sheep, and man, those coyotes were picking off a sheep weekly, and you would hear them and just laying in your bed, and that will chill your blood. So not only was some of the creepiest animals ever on her porch, but that is really weird coyote behavior, because coyotes are afraid of humans and they will avoid going near buildings, humans, people. Coyotes are the scariest little animals, and so that's why they had to have the most terrifying sound. It's like their bark is bigger than their bite. So finding just some way to get your reader interested from the very beginning and having a really nice, strong setup. Give them false alarms. In horror movies, it's pretty typical. Even if you have somebody walking down a dark alleyway, you know that this is when they're going to get kidnapped, something bad's going to happen. Having that false alarm in there where they hear a rattle, they're jerked by noise, they turn and realize, oh, it's just a stray cat eating out of the garbage. Like, those little things that can lead up to it, that can set some tension. And then they have that false sense of security afterwards. Oh, it was just a cat. Okay, you're fine. Like, quit getting in your head about this. And then, bam, they're kidnapped. So having those false alarms. Leaving each chapter, we want them left wanting more. This is so important for if we're serial writers, is that at the end of each one, they're like, no, I need to know what happens next. You want them actually angry at you that you don't have the next episode ready for them to read. Or if this is now in a novel, you want them unable to put this book down, where they're like, I can't go to bed. Like, just one more page, one more chapter, and then they're up for 2 more hours, and then they just finished the book. Like, that is the feeling that we want them to have with it. And then also for ourselves, something that we can do is, when you write your story, let it sit for a little while, and then you go back and read it with the mindset of a reader and experience the story for yourself. Does it scare you? So that should be something where you should be able to sit there and go, oh my gosh, I wrote this. Like, this is really creepy. Like I don't know if I can keep reading, kind of thing. Like, so it needs to be something after you've let it sit and chill for a little bit. Like, it needs to scare you when you come back to it. All right, we're at 50 minutes. Are there any last questions before we close up? You guys were great. Anything we didn't cover that you needed to know that you're like, oh shoot, I was hoping she was going to talk about this? This is your last chance. Do the Jeopardy. Do, 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 do. We're only going to limit by time. We got like 2 minutes to bounce. Oh, the number of times you use the false alarm. You want to limit that. Yeah, don't overuse anything. Again, unless there is a reason why you're doing it. Because we've all seen those horror movies where they're walking through the house. We know the killer's in the basement, and they go into the kitchen and everything slows down, and they open the fridge and the music gets in it. Oh, there's just a beer in the fridge. Okay, we shut the fridge. We go into the bedroom. Oh, it's really creepy. Is somebody hiding behind the door? And then the music builds up, and we're really wondering. They open the door, and it's empty. And then they go upstairs. Oh, and the stairs are creaking, and we're going upstairs, and we're getting really afraid. Where are they gonna find cobwebs? So think about that, and think about how often that is overdone in horror movies, where you're just like, again, seriously. So it is super. I'm describing every R.L. Stein book. Yeah, so just think about when it happens. So when you're watching horror movies, pay attention to their pacing. Pay attention to how many times they did something. How did you respond to it when they did it the second time? When they did it the third time? Like, what are they doing that annoyed you, and what are they doing that scared you? And with music, while we don't have, it would be really great if we could put a soundtrack to our book and would follow the reader's eye, and the music would happen, and it would build, and there'd be little popping sound effects here, or that. While we can't do that, we do that with just the way that we build tension, with our pacing, with the feelings that the reader is experiencing. So that is your music that you're building into your story. So look at the things in horror that scares you. How did they do that? And then look at the things in horror that really irritated or bothered you or let you down, and avoid those. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, I think we're going to wrap this one up. If anyone wants to jump over, I'll be teaching again about self-editing. These are going to be things that you can do on your own that will improve your writing just naturally, and it will also make it easier to get a better rate when you're looking at getting professional editing done, because the more you can fix these mistakes on your own, the cheaper rate you can negotiate with an editor. So thanks everyone so much. I hope you'll join me on the next Zoom link.